Okay, I think we're ready. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar called Open Source Legal Blues, Do You Comply? Understanding and Reducing Open Source Legal Risks. Myself is Rami. I'll host this webinar. It's of course sponsored by WhiteSource, the open source lifecycle management company. In this session, we'll start off by reviewing open source governance issues. This will be done by attorney Chaim Ravia, who is joining us today especially for this webinar. And we'll then do a quick introduction of the WhiteSource service. I will then show a demo of what the service actually looks like, and we'll then wrap things up and allow for questions and answers. So during the presentation, please type in your questions in the control bar, and we'll get to them in the end. In any event, we will collect all of the questions and write up full answers and send them back via email. Also, for participants of this webinar, we have a special offer for the week starting today. Anyone signing up to the service and starting to use it by loading open source information would be eligible to participate in a raffle for $100 worth of Amazon gift card. Okay, so with that, I would like to present Chaim Ravia. Chaim chairs the Internet IT and Copyright Group at Pearl Cohen Tzedek Latzar, an international IP law firm with offices in the US, UK, and Israel. As such, he deals extensively with computer and Internet laws, copyright, and open source software. Nominated by Who's Legal to be one of the leading lawyers in Internet, e-commerce, and data protection. Since 2010, Chaim, amongst other professional activities, was the chair of the Presidium of the Israel Bar Association Computing Committee. In '96, he founded Israel's first legal website, and we are very happy to have him as a member of the WhiteSource Advisory Board. And with that, I'll turn things over to him. Chaim?
Thank you, Rami. Hello, everybody. I'd like to take the next few minutes and walk you through some of the best practices of open source governance. I will cover mostly open source compliance policies and look at some of their pros and cons. In recent years, there have been a few cases in which companies were taken to court for violating terms of open source licenses, most notably the GNU General Public License, the GPL. In the US, lawsuits were filed by the Free Software Foundation or the Software Freedom Law Center. In May 2009, for example, the FSF and Cisco settled a lawsuit which alleged that Cisco violated the GPL and the lesser GPL in its distribution of FSF software. The settlement included, amongst other things, the appointment of a free software director for Linksys, a subsidiary of Cisco, to supervise Linksys' compliance with the requirements of free software licenses and what was described as a monetary contribution to the FSF. Other settlements were reached with Verizon, Extreme Networks, and Supermicro. In Germany, a few cases were brought by the GPLviolations.org project. As far as I know, they won them all. At least one case that I am aware of was reported in France, and I personally handled one interesting case here in Israel. Any lawsuit is a headache. It requires time, attention, and resources. The defendant needs to hire attorneys, pay legal fees, nobody likes that, deal with bad publicity and roar in the open source community, etc. In short, lawsuits for non-compliance are something you may prefer to avoid. Complying with free software licenses is not important solely because of the direct legal risk. There are other factors to be considered. Organizations want to develop software that comply with the terms of open source licenses simply because they want others to respect their own IPN licenses. They want to preserve the intellectual property integrity of their products and protect intellectual property portfolios. They want to be ready to perform due diligence that may be required if the company is looking for an investment, negotiating a merger and acquisition transaction, or a complex licensing deal. Take, for example, a startup performing an exit. A potential acquirer's due diligence process would require the target company to list all open source components it uses and their respective licenses. In order to comply, the company must be in control of its open source uses. This is definitely not a good time to discover that you statically linked your proprietary code against a GPL program. The case may be even worse if the author of the GPL program is one of the father figures of the free software movement. Okay, so controlling your use of open source software begins with a good open source compliance policy. There's a wide range of possible policies. A global company such as IBM obviously needs a policy which is different than an emerging startup's policy. But very roughly speaking, there are two types of policy. I will call the first one an educating policy and the second a procedural policy. The educating policy aims to put the decision in the hands of developers. It therefore describes in length the pros and cons of using open source software, the types of licenses they may encounter, the guidelines for integrating open source software into the company's products, etc. Usually I don't recommend this kind of policy. Open source licenses are sometimes difficult to understand and complex. Take LGPL 2.1 as an example. You cannot expect a developer who's eager to meet his deadline to act as an experienced IP attorney. I fear that the company would lose control over the actual use of open source software in its products. However, this kind of policy has one major advantage. The decision process is fast enough not to interfere with the product's deadlines. The procedural policy is the more prevalent type of open source compliance policy. This policy provides that the use of open source software is subject to the prior written approval of an open source review board. The board is made up of officers such as the company's VP R&D or technology, the IP manager, legal counsel, etc. Of course, if a company is large enough, it may have several such boards, and consequently the company is faced with the challenge of providing them all with uniform guidelines. The procedural policy sets a procedure for approving use of open source software. It provides that no open source shall be integrated with the company's products or distributed by the company unless approved in advance according to the approval process. It may also apply to in-house uses, especially of development tools such as compilers. The approval process will typically include providing the Open Source Compliance Board with information required to make a decision. What free software do you want to use? In which of the company's projects? What is the license that governs that open source software? Why not develop in-house or acquire a commercial license? And other questions similar to that. In making its decision, the Open Source Compliance Board will consider, amongst other things, the legal implication of using that particular software, the terms and conditions of the license covering the relevant free software, the benefits expected from the intended use, the scope of the company's code which should be contributed back to the open source project, etc. The pros of this kind of policies are clear. However, it has some cons as well. Control is dependent upon developers' cooperation. If a developer mistakenly did not apply for approval despite using free software, you may be heading for trouble. The approval process takes time. Usually, the process hardly seems to be fast enough to meet developers' needs. Of course, with time, the board gains experience and can speed up the approval process. However, members of the board always have their other tasks to fulfill, so usually getting an answer fast enough is a problem. A good policy is important, yet it does not end in that. You have to educate your staff to understand that open source software is not free to use simply because it's available online. So preparing written materials for developers to read, having them attend seminars from time to time, and letting them become familiar with the company policy, all are important and should be followed. That takes us to another aspect of controlling your use of open source software. Even if you have a good compliance policy in place, even if you educate your staff, you still need to have a comprehensive list of the free software you use. What seems like a simple task such as providing a list of open source components and their respective licenses for a due diligence process, may be the most daunting of all due diligence tasks, one that may delay the closing for weeks or even worse, cause the potential acquirer to walk away. The reason lies in the company's poor control and management of the open source software. They either don't have a comprehensive list of open source software that they utilize, or they have an insufficient and incomprehensive one. Also, developers tend to forget that even if they maintain a list of open source software, the components they incorporate in their software rely upon other free components in order to function. A fully detailed list must include dozens, hundreds, sometimes even thousands of open source software libraries and programs. In the heat of development, when reaching the market is management's top priority, the legal nitty-gritty is often neglected. This neglect can later blow up in the face of the company's management and potentially jeopardize deals. A repository of open source software is best created and maintained automatically. People tend to be forgetful, think that they have a good reason not to follow their procedures, neglect their duties, or have any other excuse not to go through the approval process. An automatic repository will hopefully not suffer from human shortcomings. Investing in a reliable open source policy and maintaining a comprehensive list of open source software will definitely pay off in due time. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, you can contact me. You have the email address on the screen. It is Haimr, H-A-I-M-R, @pczlaw.com. Thanks again.
Okay, so thank you very much for Chaim for shedding some light on this complex subject of open source compliance and organizational policies. And after seeing the challenges involved with managing open source usage, we can now see what White Source Service can provide to facilitate handling all of these challenges. So what is White Source? Firstly, it's a cloud-based software as a service that helps organizations manage their usage of open source and licensing requirements. The first thing it does is automatically detect new components, new open source libraries that enter the development project. It can also automatically identify licenses and risks and the requirements of those licenses. It helps you manage your open source inventory and implement the relevant organizational business processes to support the decision-making around open source acceptance. And one of the most important aspects is that it helps organizations keep track of updates to open source libraries and to internal changes in their own projects. All in all, it helps you mitigate the legal, business, and technical risks, but hardly has any friction with the development team. So developers can go about their business without any unnecessary delays or hurdles that they have to go over before starting to do their own work, which is write code. Currently, this is the only real solution that addresses the real challenges that arise from this area in all companies, small and large, enterprise, or just a startup company. So after we've heard from Chaim the related legal risks that come with using open source libraries, we need to consider that legal risks imply business risks, right? Because whenever you get yourself in trouble legally, that will always impact your business. So misuse of open source libraries can easily burden your due diligence. It can cause you difficulties when negotiating corporations or OEM deals. And it can even cause you problems when dealing with very large customers, which today we find more and more of them are asking to see a full listing of open source libraries being installed on their servers before allowing their vendors to proceed. Not to mention that open source also has some unique technical challenges especially around tracking patches and updates that go on the market regularly. And since there are so many of them, it's kind of difficult to keep track. So what are the technical challenges of managing open source manually? So I'm a company, and I know I'm using open source. I want to manage the usage of open source by myself. Why is that even a problem? So first of all, open source, being source code, has a lot of added linkage, meaning that there are other libraries that are being used by the open source libraries, and this can happen recursively. So when implementing one open source library, you often find yourself having to drag in all its dependencies and their dependencies and so on. And that's difficult to keep track of, even if it's done automatically by the development team. And secondly, these things tend to change largely over time. So libraries change, legal implications change, licenses can change, versions get updated all the time, and that's very, very difficult to monitor manually or have someone in the development team dedicate a lot of time and effort just to keep track of what's going on with your open source libraries. So naturally, hardly any companies really possess all of the resources and expertise that are required to manage their usage of open source well and to be on top of this issue. So what are they doing with this issue, with this problem? So some companies don't really do anything, and they are very much exposed to all of the legal, business, and technical risks. A large majority of the companies try to handle this problem by managing a manual document, sometimes an Excel spreadsheet, with a list of open source libraries being used by development. That's a very difficult thing to do because, as we've said, these things have a lot of dependencies which are hard to keep track of, and developers tend to change them and update versions and not tell you about it. And it's very hard to implement an effective process around forcing the development team to really keep track of this sort of things. And the other solution is to try and work with some existing solutions in the market today that are very, very complex. They come in the form of code scanners. They are very hard to implement, to install, to upgrade, to learn how to use, and they are very, very expensive. So effectively, only the top 1% of the richest enterprises in the world that distribute software can even consider using existing solutions. Not to mention the fact that not only the licensing cost is great, but the implicit cost of having people in your organization having to continuously maintain that solution and update it and work it and run it all the time is very, very expensive internally and often causes delays in application lifecycle and time to market. Okay, so now that we understand that there is some sort of a gap here between what you can do manually and what you can do automatically, this is where WhiteSource steps in. So what do we offer? First of all, we provide a convenient way to have everyone agree on a single point where the inventory is being managed and do so automatically. Second, we have the organization implement and automate the implementation of the relevant business processes and approval workflows for onboarding new open source libraries and starting to use them properly. And thirdly, we provide with an extensive set of dashboards and reports that let various players in the organization review and report about different aspects of open source inventory and usage that goes on in the organization. So all of these should help organizations identify and mitigate the legal, technical, and business risks that we have talked about, to automate the enforcement of their organizational open source policies, and to very, very easily and without burdening anyone, implement the relevant open source processes and make sure that they are compliant with the licensing and the licensing requirements. Okay, now I'll show you a quick demo of what the system actually looks like. So let's skip over to our server. Okay, so what we're looking at right now is actual data of our own development organization from WhiteSource using the WhiteSource service. So this is the main organizational dashboard. It's divided into three main parts. Top part tells us about alerts. We'll get back to them. The main part is a mini inventory, and the bottom part is the way we provide the users with a comfortable way to manage their approval process. So going back to the mini inventory, at WhiteSource, we have two products. One is the server that's in the cloud, and the other is a code scanner that we'll talk about later. And you can see that I have this mini inventory in the center of my screen where I can see a full listing of the open source libraries being used in my product and their licenses, and get a quick aggregated view of the licenses being used divided into risk factors. And this is very meaningful information for me, so I can very easily understand my degree of exposure in terms of licensing compliance and requirements. So let's try and drill into one of our projects, one of the development projects, called the WSS Client 1.1.0, and see a full inventory. So in this project page, we see an enhanced listing of the inventory, the open source libraries, a quick description, and a full listing of their licenses. And again, an aggregation of the licenses based on risk levels. And now if I want to drill into even further and look at the library page, for example, I can see that for a specific library, I get a lot of information about that library, including where it came from, what's the homepage, who the community is, what versions we know of, what the dependencies are and the dependencies of the dependencies, and so on. And I can go all the way down to the license page and see a full detail listing of the license risks, or the risk associated, in this case, with the Apache license. I can get the full text if I want, but I have a breakdown of various types of risk factors, for example, copyright, copyleft, linking, patent, and so on. And at the bottom, I can even see the required notices. So it's a very easy way for me to understand all of the related requirements with all of the open source libraries that we use internally in WhiteSource, and make sure that I am compliant with the licensing requirements and I'm aware of the risks at any given point in time. Let's skip back to our organizational dashboard and review the alerts for a second. So what are these alerts? These are actually all kinds of interesting things that we can tell an organization about their inventory once we have a full listing of their inventory. And for example, a nice little alert type that we have is a newer version alert. So whenever we identify, WhiteSource identifies that a newer version of an item in your inventory is out in the market, we'll pop up this little alert letting you know, look, this library has a new version, you may want to upgrade, you know, there are security patches and major bugs that were fixed and things like that. And this is something that organizations hardly ever keep track of because there are too many and no one really has the attention span to go and keep looking up these things online. And finally, for this demo, I'll show you quickly what the flat inventory report looks like. So this is the kind of report that lets you see a full listing of your open source libraries. In this case, it's a full organizational report, but I can do it by product as well. And it shows me the library, a quick description of the library, the license, and where it occurs in my projects. And I can export this report to Excel so I can share it either internally or externally with investors, with clients, with partners, with whoever I see fit. Okay, so we've seen sort of a high-level cross-section of the features that we talked about, the inventory, the approval process, and the reporting. So with that, let's go back to our presentation so we can conclude. Hold on. Okay, so why use WhiteSource? First of all, it's a very comprehensive solution to open source management and open source license requirements, management, and it's very, very easy to use. It's very intuitive. It's cloud-based software as a service. It takes minutes to set up and get immediate feedback. And we have a wide range of supporting plugins to help you automate almost everything that has to do with open source adoption and compliance. We provide you with automatic detection of open source libraries in real time so you can know what's going on as the development team is working on a project and not find yourself trying to fix problems when you want to go out in the market. We can help identify licenses, risks, and license requirements. We give a full tool set to support approval processes by the organization. We track updates and changes so you don't have to, and provide a rich set of dashboards and reports that help everyone that has anything to do with open source in the organization know what's going on at any given point in time. Our solution is extremely easy to use. You don't need to train. It's very intuitive. There's a lot of online documentation and help, and you can get started on yourself. And it's free. It's free to get started. There are premium packages which are currently free. And if you're an enterprise organization, you'll have to talk to us. But anyone else can just start using the service today and not worry about cost. So how do you get started? First thing you have to do is just sign up, go to your open source folder, drag and drop all the existing libraries that you know about, and let the system find the dependencies, licenses, and requirements for you. Sit back, wait a couple of minutes while the system processes your information, and get immediate feedback in the form of dashboards and reports to provide you with a full analysis of your open source status at that point in time. So literally 10, 15 minutes, any company can know what's going on in terms of open source inventory and requirements. The second stage, once you've done a current assessment of your open source usage and requirements, you can start to automate your ongoing day-to-day operations that has to do with open source. So we have a large selection of plugins to all the main development tools, Maven, Ant, TeamCity, Jenkins, and so on, that you can connect on your own development environment and have WhiteSource keep track automatically for you and enforce policies automatically. And after you've matured a bit and you enjoyed using the WhiteSource service for a while, you can go to the next level and start implementing more complex organizational policies and automate them and the approval workflows and enjoy the full benefit of the service, which has really advanced features on top of the simple features that we've talked about. In terms of technology, the solution is software as a service. You don't need to install anything. You don't customize. It's always up to date because we update it for you on the cloud. And none of your proprietary code is ever being scanned by our servers. So your privacy is guaranteed. In terms of development environment integration, we cover pretty much all of the most popular tools that's out there, either by continuous integration servers or Maven or Ant or the environment that you use to host your cloud service. or whatever you choose to work with in the development organization, we can connect to. If you're an enterprise organization and you have something that only you use, we also have an open API to support that. In terms of platforms, currently we provide full support to the Java programming language. .NET, we're currently hard at work on that platform, and it will be out soon. And naturally, we will be supporting more and more development languages as we progress. In terms of pricing, it's free. There is a fully featured free version that smaller companies can use, and it will stay free. There are few premium features that we will add to as time progresses, but for now we're going to give them as free to use to everyone. So there is no limitation. Just enterprise organization will have to talk to us, but that's a normal scenario where you would want to get more and more support and things like that. And for enterprise organizations, we also have a possibility to install a private cloud installation if that's something that's important to you. Okay, so as we've seen, it's a very, very easy way to manage your open source assets and requirements, to make sure that you are complying with licensing requirements, and to mitigate the various risks associated with open source libraries and licenses. But to mention, it's a very, very comfortable way to enforce your organizational open source policy with very, very little effort and hardly any burden to the development team. So you can take a few minutes and sign up at whitesourcesoftware.com. Also, just this week, we have a special offer for people who join this webinar. If you sign up and load the open source information to the system, you will be eligible to join our raffle for a $100 Amazon gift card. So take this opportunity and sign up now. Okay. At this point, I will take some of the questions we posted. Let's see what these are. Okay, I see there are quite a few questions. I'll try to answer the popular ones. So let's get started. Jacob asks, what's the quickest way to see my current open source status? So as I've mentioned, you can register at WhiteSource right now and just drag and drop your open source libraries. Dashboards and reports will be active within minutes. The WhiteSource system really replaces a lot of manual processes and removes developers from the loop altogether. And with our rich set of plugins, you can automatically identify when new libraries are being introduced to the development project and implement the relevant business processes associated with them and enforce your organizational policies. Okay. Another question. Do I need to upload my own code to your cloud service? What assurances do I have about confidentiality of my code? So, no, you do not load your code to the WhiteSource service. We just take metadata that tells us what open source libraries you're using. WhiteSource servers are never exposed to proprietary code. We do provide a free open source code scanner called JNIMCA that you can run offline, and it scans your code to see if developers might have copy-pasted code into your own proprietary code and generates a findings file. And you can then load that findings file back to WhiteSource and enrich your inventory, but at no point will the server ever see proprietary code. I hope that's clear. Let's see, next question. I understand service is free now. When do you expect to charge and how much? So yeah, it's free. It's going to stay free for at least quite a while now. At the very least, you will get a 3 months notice before we intend to start charging. And in any event, smaller companies will always be able to use this service for free and at no charge. And we'll only be charging for the more advanced features which are already marked inside the service as premium. You'll see a little P icon next to all the premium features. The exception to this rule are enterprise organizations that will need to talk to us and have some license in place when they use our service. Okay, I think we'll stop here for now. We'll take all the questions that you've asked, and we'll do a full listing of questions and answers, and make sure to forward them via email to all the participants. So I hope this was an educational session and that all of you learned something about the risks of mismanaging open source and the available solutions that WhiteSource offers. So thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you soon.